God bless. This is NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL Extended Strategic Principles, found on the web at NFL-ESP.com. I am your host, Mark Anthony DeBello, and you can find more information on me and this program by clicking on the Sports tab at markanthonydebello.com. This is NFL Week 5. Today is Monday, October the 5th. It's 8:02 p.m. or 8 p.m. here, Pacific Standard Time. It's the fourth quarter of the Monday night game. Seattle's winning 13-10. So I'm going to try to get a early start on recording this 30-minute program for the upcoming NFL week because it takes time to download and to transfer and then post on the NFL-ESP.com website, and again at the markanthonydebello.com website on the Sports tab. Again, the goal is to get a wider audience. Regrettably, I can look at the blog that's more or less attached to this program, found at sportsblog.com/markdebello or Mark Anthony DeBello, and I see that some of the media and the college coaches or college personnel and organizations and even some of the pros aren't necessarily clicking or reading. I don't know if they're listening. To you, the general public, I appreciate your listening because I don't believe you're going to hear a more accurate assessment of or analysis of NFL games and even sometimes college covered from the NFL ESP perspective, which you can find more information on the website. So I'm going to again keep this program to a half an hour, break it down into NFL ESP coverage, which looks at the motivational, spiritual, strategic, and the X's and O's from our unique data system and viewpoint, which has been proven to increase a team's production by 10 to 15% minimally in the NFL, perhaps even more, and then up to 20 or 25% or more in the college ranks. Again, the goal is to ultimately get more viewership or audience listeners for NFL Moneyball here with the media, and then also to latch on again as a consultancy and a service, which includes our use of a GMC or game management coordinator in the booth, which again helps a team, pro or college, with their strategic basic strategy decisions. And again, we typically use our NFL ESP system when it comes to the strategic, and our unique and exclusive use of a data system or a product analysis or research we call the power spread. Again, this number is the more accurate number than the spread that they use in Nevada. We believe in the integrity of the games, but again, it doesn't mean that this data isn't appropriate or at least applicable, okay? So I'm off to a little bit of a rocky start here. I'm trying to multitask by watching the game, looking over some of the data and information. But again, we're going to cover it from an NFL ESP perspective and a Las Vegas or Nevada perspective as it equates to those who might have an interest there. And then I vow definitely this week to spend more time on the fantasy angle, although again I've been competing at FanDuel and don't want to give away too much there. I actually like FanDuel more than DraftKings, and that's for spiritual reasons. And I've already been blessed to be victorious at FanDuel, and will continue my process toward hopefully winning one of their championships in a contest that I've enrolled in online. So we're also going to recap the week's games from last week, look ahead to this week, and we've already wrapped up basically our season projections. Those won't change. You can find those on the blog. That covers everything from the predictions in the playoffs to the teams involved, to the power rankings of the teams and the quarterbacks. So having said that, let me make a few quick notes here from an NFL ESP's perspective. A couple of things that coaches, they don't see correctly. I can't, again, offer it all or give it all away, but I've been hearing a lot, and we already mentioned this, and when I say we, it's God and I, because he is the author of all knowledge, and if I can hear what he has to say, and you've heard me mention the 3 Ps, prophecy, prediction, and production, I'll always be more, knowledgeable or accurate. And again, we've been proven to be 91 correct. He's 100% correct. I'm 91% correct because I'm not always a perfect human being and can tap into his wisdom. But again, any God-given abilities I have in my intellect and talents there surely come from him. So the thing I mentioned last week was a lot about penalties. Again, a prolific amount, and that quite simply, from our perspective, equates to home field advantage. Not only the gross amount of penalties, but the timing, especially of the penalties, mostly in benefiting the home team at crucial points in the game. That's why they get a home field advantage for the most part in point production. I don't think there's a coach who quite understands that or realize that, or especially the media or anybody who's doing any other kind of analytical data. Which is the sort of new wave, but again, we break it down into 4 actual segments there. I'm watching the Seattle game. They're getting a lot of home call penalties. Surely bad teams get a lot of penalties called against themselves. I saw Buffalo actually at home against the Giants surprisingly lose to the Giants, which you heard me here last week. I predicted that wouldn't happen. And they had, I think, double-digit penalties. So did the Giants. So there is surely a net that needs to be discussed there. But bad teams typically get penalties called against them. Not only is it the home field advantage against the road team, but we also have a really important statistic called the cleanliness of a team, the quote-unquote cleanliness. I mentioned it briefly last week, and one of the data points in that analysis, and I can mention a couple real bad teams. Philadelphia is a really quote-unquote unclean team, and you're seeing them, be, really underproducing this season as we had predicted. But one of those cleanliness stats, and I mentioned it briefly last week, I can give them all to you again. It's missed kicks or field goals, missed field goals, it's penalties, it's turnovers, and it's dropped passes. It's basically the ball hitting the ground for the most part, or going over to the other team. You can include safeties in that. Safeties, from our data, is considered a turnover, are considered turnovers. But nonetheless, unclean teams, they're not disciplined usually. They have undisciplined coaches, head coaches, undisciplined players. They just play, basically what's easily discerned as sloppy football. So having said that, you can look at a team like Buffalo, and I apparently must have overrated them. I still think they're going to be a playoff team. I don't know now that they can win the division against New England, but I can't believe they lost to an NFC East team like the Giants, and I know that the NFC East is a weak division. Again, and you can see all the final prognostications on the season there on the NFL-ESP.com website. The second thing I want to mention is injuries. There's a lot of talk of injuries already this year. When we did some analysis on the last week's games, there were a couple of changes at quarterback, which is obviously in this quarterback-centric league is the most important position on the field. But Andrew Luck ended up not playing against Jacksonville, although that didn't alter the outcome. It probably should have, because Jacksonville missed a bunch of field goals. And then it did alter the result of the Oakland-Chicago game because Jay Cutler got back in there, and he is much, as low-rated as he is overall amongst starting quarterbacks, he's definitely more highly rated than Jimmy Clausen. But again, we rate a quarterback from basically 0 to 9 points, and if the average NFL game is 45 points, which it is, that gives you whatever that percentage is, 27 or basically, let's see, 9 into 45 goes, 5 times? So 20% of a team's production. So That's how important the quarterback is, and in many cases it's even more so for intangible reasons. For instance, I'm watching Russell Wilson play tonight, and then and he's scrambling and creating on third down. And again, we can break this down, and you'll see this in the final predictions for the NFL season. Typically what you're going to see now is you're seeing one non-traditional, let's say scrambling type quarterback. His team will be the best, in his conference. There'll be one team, within that template or format or model, and then another in the traditional sense, more the straight drop back, pure passer. So in the NFC, we broke it down to the two top teams being Green Bay and Seattle, although both of those teams have, I'm sorry, not Green Bay and Seattle, Green Bay and Arizona, because of the two best scrambling quarterbacks on their offense, Seattle and Russell Wilson, and Green Bay and Aaron Rodgers. We give the edge, as we did at the beginning of the season, to the Packers. And then definitely the best pure drop-back passing team is Carson Palmer and the Cardinals, even though they got defeated by the Rams, which was basically because of turnovers, which are, any coach can tell you is probably the most defining statistic or integral part of a game. And I can break down and have done a chalk talk where I broke down all the production factors for a team, from quarterback play to turnovers to basic strategy decisions to home field advantage, and basically broke down where the point production comes from, within a game. So anyway, having said that, in the AFC, the best pure drop-back passing quarterbacking team is again New England this season, beating out Denver. And the best mobile quarterback, believe it or not, is actually Andrew Luck, although, because of his team, is generally better than, let's say, somebody like Marcus Mariota, who's one of the best, and Johnny Manziel, who's actually one of the best, although he's got, I've been in, speaking of Johnny Manziel issues the last couple of weeks, so you should listen to those, and not his issues, his team and his organization and coaching issues on his team. But Andrew Luck would actually be better served to use his legs more, and he hasn't been, and now he's been trapped in the pocket more. His team is much weaker this year than last year, and he's now injured, and he was injured last game, a shoulder injury, because he's been in the pocket too much. I know they tell you it's safer, it's riskier out of the pocket, but believe it or not, now the NFL teams have been stocking up on defensive ends, which is something I mentioned philosophically over almost 2 decades ago, that's how you stop a passing game. You don't wait for the quarterback to throw the ball and get good cornerbacks, or shut down corners as they call them. You don't even let him get it out of his hands. So that's why the sack artist and defensive ends have become a premium. But now that's I don't want to say leveled off, but now that every team is aware of that, the way to now defense your team or to make your team more successful at getting passes off is to have a scrambling quarterback who can create time outside of the pocket. And if you keep your quarterback in the pocket too long, he's going to get hammered. I mean, I've seen it a lot with Joe Flacco, Ryan Tannehill with Miami. I mean, these guys can run. They need to use all their attributes. You cannot limit them, to simply trying to make them be drop-back passers. It's target practice back there. So anyway, having said that, if the Colts can just get Andrew Luck running more, they'll get back to being much more productive on offense. And again, as I rate it by the end of the year, it'll probably be New England and Indy in the finals in the AFC, and Green Bay and Arizona in the NFC. And then you'll see again in the Super Bowl one drop-back passing quarterback, as you saw last year with New England and Brady, and then one scrambling quarterback, as last year was Wilson in Seattle. So again, all those picks and prognostications are on the NFL-ESP.com website, and again, you can see those by clicking on the blog. So as we near about halfway through the program here, I'm going to get to covering some things from an NFL ESP perspective and a Vegas perspective. Again, believing wholeheartedly in the integrity of the game, but just using the data, as I don't believe people need to monetize everything in this earth, on this earth, and you know, and BET on everything. Anyway, I want to make a note here. Detroit was going in for the lead with under the 2-minute warning here at Seattle, and there's a call that Calvin Johnson fumbled at the goal line. I didn't get to take a good look at it, but I can tell you, I'm going to look right now here at the replay. Yeah, he fumbled, but looked like just before he got in the end zone. So as I say, regardless, believe it or not, even though they do the video replays back in New York, it's just amazing how the home team, still gets those biased officiating calls. But just a demoralizing loss it must be for Detroit if they don't come back and tie this game. So I'll give you an update on that, but that's going to be past tense when we get to this segment. So going back, Baltimore against Pittsburgh, Vic didn't play as poorly as people thought. We mentioned that. Baltimore went ahead and got the win, a must-win for them. And again, we had them ranked as the top-ranked or one of the top-ranked teams in the NFL this year. And as mentioned, I worked with Coach Tressman in Chicago the last couple of years, and I think they're going to bounce back. That's a very tough division again, and Cincinnati, I still believe, is overrated. The Jets beat Miami. That was predictable. Jacksonville kept Indy close. Probably should have won that game. That shows you how valuable Andrew Luck is to that Indy franchise. I'm totally shocked that Buffalo lost to the Giants. I never saw that coming, and I can't attest to it other than the fact, or put an attribute to it, other than the fact they looked really, really flat, Buffalo, and penalties, and I just can't really understand that one. It can't be right on everyone. Carolina played Tampa. As you clearly heard me note here last week, Jameis Winston was going to throw a lot of interceptions. He did. Carolina, and Noah's playing over their head, although I give them all the due credit and respect. Once they, along with Atlanta, come out of their division or come out of that NFC East and play a more, more highly power-rated team, they're gonna lose. But Jameis Winston, I told you, he's a gunslinger. He's just firing into coverage a lot, and he threw actually one or maybe two pick sixes that game. I know he threw one for sure. So anyway, having said that, that was accurate. Philly, as we predicted, lost to Washington, and Washington is not a good team. But you heard our prognostications from early in the year about Philadelphia and how they were going to have maybe win 4 or 5 games this season. And there's a lot to do with their tempo, all that with the Bradford trade I mentioned, and you're going to see their defense start cracking now as the season progresses. And again, here's the note I wanted to make about injuries. Sorry I got interrupted at the beginning of this recording. Injuries, people seem to think there's some sort of anomaly when it comes to injuries, that it's, they make excuses for them. Injuries are a direct correlation to basically, if I can remember off the top of my head, 3 things. One is, and I'm not necessarily in this order, one is that the other team is more talented than you. Football is a physical game, and when the other team outplays you and beats you up, you get injured. Secondly is lack of conditioning. Guys just aren't in the shape going into games that they should be in, I'm sorry. So those are probably the top 2 reasons. I can't think of the third off the top of my head. But again, injuries are just a reflection of the team. You can look at the injury rosters of teams, and what people will do, the media especially, even probably coaches, I can't always speak for them, but I know the media, they'll look at an injury report and say, this team lost because they had guys injured. No, because they're not a good team, that's why guys are getting injured. So you can basically look at the injury report and see that the best teams are the teams with the least injured players. It's not because their players are playing, it's because they're not getting hurt, if that makes any sense. Okay, and again, as attrition goes on, physical attrition goes on during the course of the season, you're going to see the better teams, guys, are going to not get hurt as much. And the poor teams, their players are going to get hurt more. It's that simple. I just don't understand how you seldom ever, I've been doing this for 45 years, and I don't think I've heard a single media person yet mention that. So Anyway, and I'll have time to do this week in fantasy as well. I know this is being a little timely covering last week. Oakland, Chicago, already mentioned that game. How Oakland was favored in that game. We didn't have that power spread as people in Nevada had Oakland favored in that game, especially when Cutler got back in. Atlanta, Houston, two bad teams. Houston is really bad. Atlanta, is not a bad team. They're a definitely improved team as we projected. They're just still overrated, and you're going to see that power spread inflate like this week. Las Vegas has it at 8 points. As bad as Washington is, Atlanta isn't technically 8 points better than Washington. Kansas City and Cincinnati thought that'd be a low-scoring game. Surprised that it's a high-scoring game. And even so, Andy Reid is infamous for being too conservative and kicking too many field goals. And when you're the power spread underdog, like Kansas City was against Cincinnati, especially in Cincinnati, you need to go for touchdowns, not field goals. This is something we would advise before the game, not after the game. I would have advised this beforehand. Anybody can tell you that, after the game or play Monday morning quarterback. But again, it just bad coaching by basic strategy decision coaching by Kansas City. And if you do those kinds of things during the course of the year, you're going to cost yourself, 2 or 3 victories or 15%. And that's part of why, and we tried to get a job with Kansas City. Actually, the director of player personnel was with the Bears. Nice enough guy, God bless him, but never got back to me, so don't know what to tell him. Cleveland and San Diego, much closer. The power spread was too big in that game. McCown's playing a little bit better, but again, we would have Manziel in there. I thought San Francisco was actually going to perhaps upset Green Bay. Goes to show to the strength of Green Bay. St. Louis and Arizona, turnovers, Arizona lost. They wouldn't have lost that game because of turnovers. St. Louis, as I projected early on, is improved. I thought they could actually be a wild card team, St. Louis. The addition of Foles at quarterback has helped them. Minnesota is a team I didn't actually quite predict or prognosticate at the beginning of the year, but in our final predictions, we've got them a playoff team, and I think they can be very close to being a wild card team, especially with Detroit failing, which was something I actually honestly was probably the biggest mistake I made from the beginning of the season. I thought Detroit would be much better, but Minnesota's actually got a pretty darn good defensive team and obviously a pretty good running game with Adrian Peterson. They got to stay away from letting Bridgewater throw too many times there. And Dallas play New Orleans. As we projected, New Orleans was going to win that game. Dallas is in the overrated NFC East, although they're the best team in the NFC East. And New Orleans isn't as bad as everybody thought. So anyway, from an NFL ESP perspective, I got about 8 minutes left. Let me run down these games quickly, and I'll cover them from a Vegas perspective as well, and then that'll give us some time to do fantasy here. So this week, Indy's playing Houston. We don't know if Luck is playing. Houston is the underdog. They're going to be the underdog even if Luck doesn't play. They've got to overcome a night game home field advantage, which is more applicable, comes into play more when everybody's watching. The refs are more biased. Houston's going to have to take some aggressive, is the word we keep using, chances. I do think they'll cover the power spread from a Vegas perspective, whether Luck is in there or not. But I just can't see them, and they could actually upset only if Luck isn't in there. But with Luck in there, they won't upset Indianapolis. But that's not a good team, Houston. Tampa and Jacksonville, this is a toss-up game, actually. Tampa needs to get home calls. I don't know that they've been getting them and haven't studied all our games. But again, Winston, you don't know what he's going to do. He could be Eli Manning-like and throw a bunch of bombs that happen to get caught, or he could throw 4 or 5 interceptions again. He's just, he's not afraid to just throw it in there. And it's not fearlessness. I just think it's lack of football intelligence. I think he just wants to throw it in there. Buffalo and Tennessee, actually, as you know, I picked Tennessee to get very close to the wild card this year. Love Marcus Mariota as a home team coming off a bye. That game is probably a 50-50 game. That's one you really have to watch turnovers and penalties since Buffalo's had so many. Baltimore and Cleveland. Baltimore off a bye. It's a new season start for them. I think they've been, underproducing. They just need to play status quo football. Their 6.5-point power spread Vegas number, which typically means that the underdog is going to cover. So that's probably going to be a Baltimore 3 or 4 point victory. For Cleveland to win, even if they go with McCown, which again I'm totally against, you have to be productive on third down, and you have to be productive in now the word is finally getting out, sandlot football, especially if you're not a good team overall or you have a bad offensive line. You want to get your quarterback mobile and let him buy the time. McCown doesn't really do that well on third down. So if you're Cleveland, you got to make some real aggressive decisions, and I don't think that they make those kind of decisions. I actually think Coach Pettin, who I actually sort of liked until now, we haven't gotten hired, so I don't know what else to do with Cleveland. But again, Cleveland doesn't make really good coaching basic strategy decisions and doesn't seem to understand that they're the underdog in most games. There's a lot Cleveland doesn't understand, and I really respect Mr. Haslam, and they do reality TV, his wife, so that's the owner. I'd really love to get in with them. And I regret this, but I'm going to run it low on fantasy time again. Atlanta, Washington, that's too many points in the power spread. Washington definitely has to be more aggressive. They're an underdog no matter what. I think Kansas City, especially Chicago, with a center injured, that's the most key position on the offensive line or offense, basically next to the quarterback, to be honest with you, unless you got a superstar running back. Kansas City should run through that number. It's 10 points, which means they should win by double digits or more, and I think you're going to see a lot of that. I'll make a fantasy note. I think you're going to see Kansas City do well there. Philly and New Orleans. Philly's a power spread home favorite. They need to get home calls. The refs need to know, and Philly's has one of the largest home field advantages in the NFL, but New Orleans should actually beat Philadelphia. So the home team, the refs, the fans, you better make it loud, because if you don't, New Orleans is going to beat you. That's the only way Philly can win, is home field advantage, and obviously always turnovers. St. Louis should keep Green Bay closer. Again, St. Louis is an underrated team and comes out of that powerful NFC West, which everybody knows. I think Cincinnati is going to lose this week in Seattle, who's the first real, I think, strong team that Cincinnati's faced. Is going to show people that Cincinnati in the AFC there is overrated. But again, Cincinnati is also a very proficient home field advantage team, so they get a lot of positive penalty calls. Arizona is playing Detroit at home. If Detroit won this, I thought they would lose. Won this Monday night game. That's just final now. They lost 13-10. But I can't see Arizona losing again, knowing that last week they lost basically because of turnovers. And again, I have Arizona and Green Bay as the finalists in the NFC. I think New England, Dallas is hugely overrated. New England is giving a touchdown. That's an accurate power spread. Actually, it's probably a little bit more. Dallas should get a lot of home field advantage in that big cavernous dome that they're in. They can still make noise there, or semi-dome, but that largest stadium, beautiful structure, Jerry Jones, who I really respect, has there. But again, New England should probably go through that number, and it's actually, I don't want to give you the real power spread, but the Vegas number is actually 8. So a lot of people are going to be investing what they call teasers, trying to get New England down. And that's why that number's already went up. And that's what most people play. They don't even play straight up anymore. They play teasers, and that's why there's a real difference between the power spread and the other spread, because that other spread is really adjusted for these people having to play a teaser, which is you get 6 or 6.5 or 7 points, or even more in some cases, to your advantage. But you can look that up. Again, I don't want to talk about the G word or the B word, because that's really what too many of these coaches are blocking their mindsets when it comes to understanding NFL ESP. I think San Francisco, I know that's too many points for the Giants to give San Francisco, and I wouldn't be surprised if San Francisco wins that game. And then the final Monday night game, but again, they need to be more aggressive, San Francisco, okay? They have to understand that they're not, they are lower rated than the Giants. In the San Diego-Pittsburgh game, I like Pittsburgh. You can look at that game going 50-50. It is in San Diego. And again, a lot of what I see in a lot of Pittsburgh and even San Diego games, because Phillip Rivers is, for lack of a better word, inconsistent, or at least the San Diego offense is what a GMC would do, a game management coordinator. We'd make decisions on the fly and adjust the number. We call it I forget what we call it. PSI, Power Spread Index. Sorry. All right, so in the last minute or minute and a half here, let me give you a couple notes on fantasy really fast. I mentioned last week, you really want to just look for, obviously, the highest scoring teams, and then however that team does its best scoring. Even if it's a team that loses a game, I mean, you can lose a game 48-41, and that 41 points is going to outscore or beat, especially even with fantasy points, teams that win their game, 10-0. And one of the key things you want to do is, again, you want to take games. The two probably key things to understand as NFL ESP or the power spread applies to fantasy. This is one is you want to get two teams that don't have good defenses. You want two bad teams playing each other, poor teams, because they'll typically both be high scoring. Two good teams keep the score down. They're good because they have good defenses. And the second thing is you want games that typically might be blowouts, because that's when guys will play more, even if they have to catch up trailing, like Houston caught up to Atlanta. Their wide receivers each scored a lot of fantasy points because they were already out of the game like 31-0 or something. Close games are typically, low-scoring games are typically closer games, and vice versa. So anyway, that's it. My time is up. This has been a quick half hour. Listen, I want you to know I appreciate you listening, those of you who do. This is Mark Anthony DeBello. You've been listening to NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL-ESP.com. Thank you, and God bless you.